echoing silence of this hall, surrounded by relics of human striving, we find ourselves contemplating a peculiar monument to anxiety. These are masks, fragments of history, gestures caught forever between tragedy and farce, evidence of every great yearning and every inevitable fall. We walk through them, believing that these artifacts hold profound wisdom. Yet much of what we carry in our own hearts is just as fragile and just as arbitrary. We spend our lives curators of the controllable, meticulously building little walls around things we cannot even define. We fixate on the trajectory of a career, the approval of a social circle, the perfect curve of another person's smile, treating these shifting sands as if they were foundational bedrock. Look closely at these displays. Every shelf is guarded by an invisible force, the need to make it asterisk matter asterisk, the impulse to categorize, to assign lasting meaning when nothing in life has a permanent label. Consider this object here. It rests innocently on a pedestal, seemingly insignificant amidst the gravitas of empires and philosophical breakthroughs. It is a child's drawing. Crude crayon lines attempting to capture what the artist understood as the sunset. Some might dismiss it instantly, a mere scribble, an accidental efflorescence of waxy pigment. Yet, in its seemingly nothingness, there lies a perfect metaphor for our anxiety. The child who drew this did not labor under the weight of expectation. The sunset, simply asterisk, was asterisk. It demanded nothing and required nothing to be valid. Our own anxieties are often just sophisticated attempts at giving such scribbles profound meaning. We draw up detailed mental blueprints for future perceived slights, for missed opportunities, for social disapproval, and we spend vast amounts of energy defending the integrity of these imaginary boundaries. We mistake emotional significance for actual weight. The desperate fear that a minor oversight will unravel an entire life narrative, the visceral panic when someone disagrees with our firmly held, perfectly crafted worldview. We assign enormous gravitational pull to things that float away on a slight draft. And if we were honest in this hall, admitting what we truly value, the simple act of breathing, the integrity of one's own attention, we would find these precious objects barely register against the background hum of genuine being. The Stoics understood this profound waste of energy. They recognized that most of our daily suffering is not caused by external catastrophe. It is caused by our internal refusal to treat reality simply as it presents itself. We are masters of pre-grieving, spending sleepless nights, calculating the potential cost of things merely asterisk, not asterisk happening, or worse, of things happening in a way we had previously designated as unthinkable. This tendency to exert such intense emotional labor on the unanchored is the illusion of control. It suggests that by simply knowing, by anticipating every slight downturn, that we can somehow preempt the force of life itself. We treat possibility like it were a faulty machine that needs constant tinkering and guarding. But existence is not an engine. It is more like a massive, unpredictable river. And what is the greatest tragedy? Not failure, for failure is merely data. No, the tragedy is believing that if we just think hard enough about avoiding discomfort, predicting every contingency, analyzing the precise emotional gradient of potential embarrassment, that we can somehow build an impenetrable fortress around our subjective sense of safety. We mistake rigorous thought for actual power. The museum's quiet grandeur seems to mock this relentless striving. It speaks, instead of endurance, of things surviving simply because they are robust enough to accept their status as mere artifacts, beautiful and finite, but incapable of dictating the passage of time or dampening the flow of human experience. To be unbothered is not a dramatic feat. It is a recognition of scale. It means looking at a social faux pas, a misplaced word, a fleeting judgment from a stranger, and recognizing that the source, the incident, and our own resulting distress are all three separate entities passing through the same moment. None has natural jurisdiction over the others. Our anxiety only thrives in the belief that they must be inextricably bound. The greatest resilience is therefore not built by reinforcing walls, but by understanding which parts of your mental architecture require no bracing at all. By realizing that much of what we agonize over, the opinions of strangers on social feeds, the perfectly structured narrative of our personal success story, is ultimately just chalk, dust drawn across a wet slate, waiting only for the next passing breath to erase it completely. We are taught from a young age that attachment equals meaning. We build our lives on the fragile premise that if something is deeply important to us, then it must be capable of breaking us. Our emotions, we are told, are signals, warning lights indicating threat or value. But what if those warning lights are frequently mistaken for divine law? If they dictate that peace can only be found by accumulating things, by gaining approval, or by maintaining a perfect equilibrium of feeling, then we have simply traded one illusion for another. For true mastery is not about building more walls. It is about realizing which walls were never needed in the first place. The struggle to control our inner lives often forces us to police external ones, too. We feel compelled to curate conversations, edit thoughts before they are spoken, and manage the expectations of others as if those perceptions held structural integrity. But remember the quiet wisdom taught by Marcus Aurelius, that much of what causes us distress is not the thing itself, but our judgment about the thing. The event occurs, our reaction imbues it with suffering. This understanding, however, demands a radical shift in posture, a kind of mental disarmament. It asks us to differentiate between what we are capable of influencing and what must simply be accepted as given. We spend enormous amounts of energy railing against the arbitrary nature of reality. The weather that spoiled the picnic, the traffic jam that cost time, the casual remark that cut deep. Yet, these events, no matter how irritating in the moment, possess zero inherent moral weight. They are merely currents passing by. This brings us to the necessary philosophy of detachment. Not as emotional coldness, the numbing numbness Hollywood often portrays, but as intellectual rigor. It is a deeply satisfying acceptance that one's joy and serenity must originate within the self, like a perfectly preserved fire burning in an inner hearth, regardless of the storm raging outside. The Stoics understood that freedom was not synonymous with endless choice. It was found in limit. The supreme freedom lay in accepting what you could not change. To do so is to cease being perpetually reactive and become contemplative. Consider Seneca. His life itself was a masterclass in sustained composure amid political maelstroms. He lived through the volatile tides of empire, experiencing wealth, disgrace, exile, and even death at the hands of those he once advised. Yet, his philosophical writings read not like laments from a prisoner, but like calmly considered instructions to an apprentice. He taught that fortune is a fickle mistress, capable of providing extravagant comfort one day and utter destitution the next. Our attachment to any single state, be it prosperity or companionship, is thus built upon shifting sand. Seneca gives us the concept of preferred indifference. This does not mean that we should cease caring about human connection, justice, or art. Instead, it means redefining asterisk, where asterisk the care resides, and asterisk to what end asterisk. We care deeply for things, yes, but only insofar as those cares do not become the primary anchor of our identity. They become a preference, a beneficial addition to life, rather than a non-negotiable absolute requirement for survival or happiness. The internal citadel we speak of is precisely this sanctuary, a space protected from both external assault and internal hysteria. It is not built with marble and grand statements. It is constructed by the meticulous discipline of thought. When the market stalls of life, the noise, the bargaining, the sudden confrontations become overwhelmingly chaotic, the disciplined mind remembers its boundaries. The shouts of frustration, the desperate haggling over trivial goods, the complaints about fate, these sounds are merely background noise to the steady beat of self-reason. This is where negative visualization returns not as a fearful ritual, but as an intellectual exercise in demystification. We do not visualize disaster just to wallow in pity or fear. We visualize it solely to rob it of its ultimate power over us. By calmly running through the sequence, what if I lose everything? What if my dearest person leaves me? What if I suffer a profound, embarrassing failure? We realize that while these events are terrifying hypotheses, they do not dismantle our capacity for reason. The core self remains intact, The panic response tries to solve a theoretical catastrophe in the moment it is imagined. But the Stoic pause reveals something more beautiful. It shows us that we have an inherent resilience, a fundamental ability to navigate setbacks without losing the map of who we truly are. Our identity cannot be contingent upon perfect health, wealth, or even favorable public opinion. It rests on the quality of our judgments and the purity of our intentions. To adopt this architecture is to willingly live in a state of managed incompleteness. We accept that failure is possible, loss is likely, imperfection is inherent, and when we arrive at that profound acceptance, when we truly are unbothered by the natural chaos of existence, we do not achieve apathy. Quite the opposite. We gain an enormous, focused energy previously consumed by worry, allowing us to dedicate our full intellectual power to virtuous action in the present moment. The peace is not a prize granted after conquering adversity. It is the steady process of understanding that adversity must arrive eventually, and we are equipped for its arrival. It requires practice, like strengthening an arm muscle through resistance training. You cannot simply declare yourself indifferent. You must repeatedly choose reason over emotional whim when faced with annoyance, perceived injustice, or the sudden collapse of expectation. This continuous choice is what forges the unshakable self. We have spent the previous hours building a formidable intellectual fortress within ourselves. We understood that external chaos, the shouting forum, the fickle approval of neighbors, the inevitable broken statue, cannot be controlled. True peace cannot come from barricading oneself against life's disappointments. It comes instead from recognizing where our boundaries lie. The challenge now is not to avoid misfortune, but to practice the art of seeing it arrive anyway. This brings us to a discipline that feels profoundly counterintuitive: negative visualization. It sounds morbid, perhaps even excessively dramatic. Yet, for the Stoics, contemplating loss was not an exercise in despair. It was a mental immunization shot. It was preemptive cognitive hygiene. The ancient technique is called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. We are taught to imagine that things we value deeply might slip away, or worse, never have existed at all. When this practice is taken too far, it becomes mere rumination, a self-defeating loop of worry. But when approached with the calm rigor of an intellectual exercise, it reveals a remarkable truth: that our emotional attachments are often disproportionate to the actual value of what we lose. Think for a moment about something you worry over incessantly today. Perhaps a difficult work meeting next week, or a slightly ambiguous text message, or the fluctuating opinion of someone whose approval you secretly crave. These worries consume so much mental currency, don't they? They are little imaginary catastrophes that demand immediate resolution and total vigilance. The core insight here is this: most of our anxiety is not about what might actually happen. It is about the asterisk story asterisk we build around what might happen. We construct these elaborate narrative scaffoldings of if and then, spending our best emotional moments defending them against hypothetical failure. And so, we approach this black sheep ritual, a modern name for a simple, radical mental retraining. We are going to simulate low-stakes disaster scenarios, not the loss of a life or the ruin of an empire, but something delightfully mundane and utterly controllable in our imagination. Imagining the worst outcome of a minor event. Let us practice this now. Close your eyes for a moment if you feel comfortable, and let us select a small, non-critical area of your current worry. Perhaps it is that presentation you have to give, or maybe simply making plans with a friend who is notoriously late. Imagine the inevitable failure. The power flickers out at critical moments. Your carefully crafted points are met not with enlightenment, but with glazed-over blankness. Your best efforts lead only to awkward silence. The immediate instinct might be panic, a physical tightening in the chest, a rush of heat rising up the neck. You will want to rescue the moment, to smooth over the imperfection, to perform some kind of intellectual magic trick that restores grace and applause. But here is where Seneca's lesson intervenes. We observe that initial spike of panic with clinical detachment. We do not judge it as failure, we simply label it. Oh, there is the anxiety about inadequacy. We watch the wave crest, acknowledge its shape, and allow it to recede without sinking into its depths. The intellectual rigor is everything. By rehearsing the imagined slight letdown, the mildly embarrassing moment, the slightly underwhelming result, we strip the potential failure of its dramatic mystique. It loses its villainous status. It becomes merely predictable friction. The thing you feared was a grand tragedy requiring heroic recovery. In reality, it is just an awkward pause that requires nothing more than another breath. The mind naturally gravitates toward what feels impactful, what demands the most emotional energy. And because we train ourselves to treat small perceived slights and minor systemic failures with detached curiosity, our capacity for reacting to large-scale existential threats slowly begins to normalize. We are retraining our default state from high alert drama queen to mildly amused philosopher. The absurdity of human anxiety is often its own greatest weapon against us. How much energy do we expend worrying about social protocol, about the correct emoji use, about whether the person across the table interpreted our silence as disdain or thoughtful consideration? By running these mental simulations, we are fundamentally undermining the power of judgment itself. We are realizing that suffering is not caused by the event, the late friend, the poor presentation, the flat tire, but by our asterisk judgment asterisk about that event. The event is neutral data. Our judgment transforms it into a catastrophe, The premeditation, thus, becomes an act of compassionate self-disarmament. We are choosing to believe in the fundamental resilience of both ourselves and the world around us. We accept, even anticipate, imperfection as the structural material of reality. Life will be messy, some parts will fall flat, and that is not a personal flaw or a cosmic betrayal. It is simply what it means to be alive. The resulting state is profound indifference, not the shallow apathy suggested by poorly conceived pop psychology, but a deep, stable indifference, an unshakable internal citadel built upon the rock of accepted reality. We are not immune to feeling, but we are no longer slaves to feeling. And that, perhaps, is the greatest freedom imaginable. We carry with us an internal record, a private library of thought, occasionally bound in the worn leather of historical necessity. This is the intimate landscape of the self, and among its greatest treasures are the words scratched onto papyrus by emperors facing not armies or barbarians, but the relentless absurdity of human existence. We are looking at Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, a notebook kept during years spent traversing the known world on the precarious edge of civilization. It is less a grand philosophical treatise intended for posterity, and more a daily internal monologue, a desperate attempt to keep the ship of reason afloat amid the storm of empire. These passages do not concern themselves with epic triumphs or universal law. No, they address the small, insidious malignancies of the soul, the petty grievance from a neighbor, the exasperating habit of one's own procrastination, the profound irritation caused by a delayed meal. And this is its genius. It grounds the most lofty philosophy into the immediate reality of paying taxes and maintaining domestic tranquility. For emperors, the pursuit of virtue was not an abstract academic exercise. It was a desperately necessary form of occupational hazard mitigation. Such texts teach us that true resilience does not require monumental shifts in circumstance, a change of regime or borders. It requires only microscopic vigilance over one's own judgments. Consider the sheer exhaustion implied by these pages. Day after day, from emperor to thought keeper, he was forced to confront the unvarnished truth. Life is fundamentally irritating. It is a cascade of small betrayals and missed opportunities. Aurelius instructs us to recall that what passes for personal drama, the gossip overheard in the bathhouse, the argument over property lines, is simply noise. It is the friction generated by countless individual egos colliding in an already crowded world. He does not tell us how to eliminate this conflict, because he knows perfectly well that human nature is stubbornly resistant to perfect harmony. Instead, he offers a different kind of armor, intellectual acceptance. It teaches us to detach from the narrative we build around those little irritations. We are often more distressed by the story we tell ourselves, the dramatic betrayal, the monumental slight, than by the actual event itself. Once that manufactured drama is exposed for the minor trifle it truly is, its power dissipates like smoke in a strong wind. He reminds us of our transient place within the vast cosmic sweep. When we compare the momentary peak over a misplaced scroll to the slow, grinding movement of stars across millennia, the former shrinks into true insignificance. This practice is not emotional withdrawal. It is focused intellectual engagement with reality. It is recognizing that our primary battleground is not the arena or the forum, but the silent, unobserved corridors between one's ears. If we can govern the judgments within this citadel, if we can agree to treat every annoying interruption as merely data, then no external chaos has the power to dismantle us. Such wisdom moves beyond mere tolerance and arrives at something deeper. Perfect indifference in the face of imperfection. It is not apathy, for that suggests a lack of feeling. Rather, it is the knowing resignation of a seasoned philosopher who understands that effort itself, the simple act of showing up, of continuing to reason, is enough. It is embracing the messy continuity of being human. I imagine him writing late at night, after an exhausting day of statecraft, plagued by the thoughts of flawed people and fleeting disappointments. He would not conclude with a triumphant battle hymn, but perhaps with something quiet, something like, "Remember that your duty today was simply to choose virtue over comfort," and to observe that choice without demanding reward for it. This understanding is profoundly empowering because it strips away the performance aspects of our modern lives. We feel compelled to curate a perfect existence, a flawless feed, a spotless reputation, a perfectly managed emotional state. Aurelius cuts through this self-imposed artifice. He tells us that perfection is not the goal. Participation, informed by reason, is. He reminds us that flaws are not failures, but simply data points about your nature and the world's persistent entropy. They are inevitable, tedious even, but entirely manageable if viewed correctly. The challenge drawn from this emperor's diary is to resist the temptation of intellectual escalation. When a minor annoyance arises, a colleague who consistently misplaces things, a friend whose promises waver, an expectation that fails to meet our internalized ideal, we must pause. We must stop trying to assign catastrophic meaning to these trivial occurrences. Instead, we must simply categorize them. This is what it means to be human. This is the friction of existence. This acceptance is not passive resignation. It is a profoundly active intellectual stance. It demands that we continually question the weight we give our immediate perceptions. When an emotional surge threatens, a sudden flash of bitterness, a righteous anger, we must pause and ask, am I reacting to this event, or am I reacting to my own expectation of how this event should have played out? By separating the lived moment from our demanding expectations, we reclaim ownership of our inner life. We realize that the greatest suffering is often self-imposed. It is the burden of requiring the world to conform to the beautifully structured narrative unfolding only within our minds. True freedom arrives when we accept the glorious, messy imperfection of reality itself, the stained scrolls, the distracted neighbor, the perpetually flawed human heart. And in accepting this beautiful chaos, we finally achieve an internal citadel that cannot be breached by a petty squabble or the weight of empires. After confronting the illusion of control in the grand halls of human striving, and having learned to treat potential failure not as a tragedy, but as an academic exercise, we are left with a deeper truth. The tranquility we seek is not found by avoiding storms, nor by building walls against external pressures. It is found, instead, in recognizing the nature of movement itself, the flow, the inevitable pull, and the constancy beneath it. Consider now a river, not a raging torrent, but one of profound, powerful current. Look closely at its surface, and you see an endless dance of reflected light, of floating leaves, of discarded bits of debris. This ephemeral beauty is what most of our consciousness latches onto: the fleeting feeling, the passing mood, the sudden burst of external validation. We mistake this movement for substance. We are drawn into it, swept along by its irresistible momentum. And in that surrender to the current, we relinquish all sense of self. Our emotions become debris upon the surface, sometimes a beautiful, bright flower, other times cold, heavy sediment, perhaps just nothing at all. They float, they pass, and they vanish downstream. The core lesson here is one of stable resistance. If you wish to navigate this river while retaining your center, you cannot fight it. That only burns precious energy. You must learn to recognize the difference between yourself and the flow passing over you. You are not the emotional debris, you are the ground upon which the water travels. This is the analogy of stable indifference, recognizing that emotions are transient currents. They come, they gather speed, they pull with undeniable force: the sudden panic, the deep swell of jealousy, the unwarranted burst of joy at some minor achievement. But these are merely physical manifestations moving through your awareness. The self, the true core of who you are, must be more like a large stone embedded in the streambed, unmoved by the liquid nature of time and feeling. The human condition often tempts us to mistake the current for the destination. We spend our waking hours trying to dam the river, building dams of overthinking or rigid planning, all in an effort to maintain some static moment of perceived safety. But rigidity, we learn, is merely a different form of resistance, and thus, it too guarantees emotional exhaustion. The wisdom revealed by these ancient thinkers does not preach stasis. It preaches acceptance of rhythm. Life asterisk is asterisk movement. The market stalls shift, the season turns. Another person disappoints you simply because they are imperfectly human. These changes are irreversible realities that possess their own necessary unstoppable momentum. To truly achieve tranquility, therefore, we must first master our judgment about these movements. We cannot stop the water from flowing downstream, nor can we compel a desired current to hold its course for us indefinitely. All we command is where we choose to anchor ourselves within the stream's bed. When the pull becomes overwhelming, when that anxiety feels like it's pulling you under with its sheer weight and urgency, we must pause and ask, is this river, or am I becoming the debris? The trick is not to eliminate the flow of feeling, it is to detach from the narrative they create. The anger, for instance, is a current that pulls you backward, dragging you into grievance and regret. The desire, an equally potent force, pushes you relentlessly forward towards some imagined peak of fulfillment. Both are powerful, yet both possess an inherent impermanence. We practice recognizing these emotional tides by naming them intellectually before they become visceral realities. We observe the jealousy not as a personal failure, but as a mere current. Ah, this is the river of comparison flowing again. We view the fear not as a warning signal demanding immediate panic, but as an observable phenomenon. This is anxiety at work, merely reacting to potential lack. By treating our internal landscape like geological survey equipment, detached, objective, and intensely analytical, we gain necessary distance. The feeling itself does not dictate the truth of the situation. Only our judgment upon it possesses that authority. Marcus Aurelius understood this profoundly. To be a philosopher is to become an observer of oneself. To write your own life story from the vantage point of the streambed stone, rather than being swept up in the drama playing on its surface. Imagine the deepest part of the riverbed. It remains damp and cool regardless of whether the water above it is sparkling with sunshine or churning with storm. That depth, that fundamental coolness, that is where inner peace resides. It is not a reward granted after struggle. It is the foundational state achieved through consistent philosophical practice. The natural world provides the most brutal, beautiful schooling for this lesson. The mountain river does not pause to consider its mood before surging past a gorge. It simply is asterisk. And we are called, through philosophy, to become something similarly resolute, a persistent, unshakable presence within the ever-shifting waters of human experience. This requires an elegant form of surrender, surrendering the need to control the outcome and embracing instead the absolute certainty of your own internal stability, regardless of how wild or chaotic the surrounding current may be. It is freedom found in accepting that nothing, absolutely nothing, can shake what has been wisely anchored. The journey through this riverbed, the quiet commitment to radical self-observation, is perhaps the most demanding and deeply rewarding labor of all. For in mastering the stable rock against the relentless flow, we finally achieve a kind of mastery over existence itself. It is not victory over the world, but harmony within oneself. We have spent these chapters building an internal architecture, a quiet fortress capable of withstanding the inevitable siege of existence. We learned to differentiate between what belongs within our command, our judgments, our intentions, and what lies outside in the unpredictable currents of others' lives and fate itself. And now we arrive at a peculiar modern frontier, the trap of comparison. The digital echo chamber, you may feel it already, the persistent hum of implied inadequacy. It is a relentless current that flows not from the natural world, but from a glass rectangle held too close to the heart. This space is curated performance, a highlight reel of lives edited for maximum enviable impact. We wander through endless streams of perceived perfection, effortless success, radical happiness, impossible physiques, a constant barrage designed to make us feel perpetually out of step. We are presented with these immaculate facades, and our immediate instinct is simply to measure up, to compare our messy, flawed, deeply uncertain backstage reality against someone else's highly polished front stage performance. It is the oldest human anxiety, the need for belonging, supercharged by technology into a perpetual state of deficit. We mistake visibility for validity. We assume that because a life is displayed online, it must be comprehensive, perfect, and worth emulating. And in doing so, we invite the greatest deception, the illusion that everyone else's struggle is contained only within their own digital perimeter. The Stoic understands this architecture of envy and comparison not as a moral failing, but as an intellectual trap, a misunderstanding of reality itself. We are comparing our entire self, our anxieties, our doubts, our inevitable stretches of mundane boredom, to another person's carefully selected 10%. It is the cruelest arithmetic performed by distraction. Think back to the sheer scale of things we have discussed, the river current analogy, the necessity of accepting human frailty, the virtue found in tedious daily maintenance. These are weighty, profound truths that demand a level of internal focus. But the echo chamber demands constant scattering, a twitchy glance at a metric, a scroll for validation. The trap operates by giving us an infinite supply of external targets. We begin policing not just our own minds, but our emotional responses to everything we see. Whose reality are you policing? Whose timeline do you feel compelled to validate? Is the urgent need for comparison truly originating within your sovereign judgment? Or is it merely a broadcast signal designed to drain your inner reserves? This digital space teaches us that nothing matters unless it can be quantified and displayed, a momentary burst of affirmation, an uptick in followers. It strips away the value of quiet contemplation, the deep satisfaction found in the subtle work of self-mastery. Seneca taught us that true freedom is indifference to things indifferent. Yet this chamber elevates everything to seeming emotional significance. The Stoic antidote here is radical withdrawal, not physical isolation, but intellectual disengagement. We must learn to treat the feed not as a window onto genuine lives, but as what it truly is, an elaborate museum of curated self-mythology. When you encounter a perfectly staged moment of triumph or bliss, do not absorb it. Do not measure your internal temperature against its apparent heat. Instead, practice intellectual dismissal. Look at the mechanisms at play. Who pays for this performance? Whose metrics are being satisfied? The underlying truth is that the entire economy of comparison relies on our belief in scarcity, the fear that if we don't achieve X or compare ourselves to Y, then our own quiet existence will lack meaning. But meaning does not require visibility. Peace does not demand an audience. True self-worth is not a variable found on a screen. It is the stable stone at the bottom of your personal riverbed, unchanging whether the current is high with accolades or low with silence. The most profound rebellion we can mount against this digital urge to compare is simply radical stillness. The moment you feel that familiar, hot tug of dissatisfaction, the sudden urge to check, to scroll, to measure, pause. Treat that urge like a strange artifact in the museum. Observe it. Note its source. Recognize it not as a failure of character, but merely as the residual pull of external stimulation. You are your own sole arbiter of value. Your internal citadel is built by observation, patience, and measured reflection, not by consuming algorithmic suggestions of who you should be. The masterpiece of modern Stoicism, therefore, is learning to look away from the glowing screens and remember the profound gravity of simply being present with your own untidy, imperfect self. This is where genuine resilience lies, in declaring that one's internal life requires no external verification whatsoever. We must cultivate a contempt for this superficial urgency. The peace we seek is deep, quiet, inconvenient, the kind that cannot be photographed or shared to generate validation. It belongs only to the uninterrupted space between your thoughts, a sacred pocket of pure judgment, uncorrupted by others' relentless self-promotion. This ability to remain undisturbed, even when the entire world seems to demand constant comparison and participation, is the highest form of inner mastery. We have traveled through the vast landscape of mental preparation. We learned to treat potential failures not as catastrophes, but as predictable data points, intellectual exercises stripped of their dramatic weight. We realized that our greatest battles are never fought in public squares or against foreign armies. They happen in the infinitesimal space between a stimulus and our reply. This is where true power resides, within the quiet, sovereign moment of delay. The most dangerous impulse in modern life is not reacting at all. It is merely reacting reflexively, emotionally, under the immediate pressure of expectation. The mind, by its very nature, seeks efficiency. And what is more efficient than reaction? a rapid discharge of energy that seems entirely appropriate to the moment. Annoyance causes a retort. Injustice demands outrage. Comparison mandates envy. These are biological shortcuts, deeply ingrained habits that served us when survival depended on speed. But in the curated landscape of modern emotional life, these shortcuts lead not to survival, but to exhaustion. The Stoic discipline asks us to resist this ease. It proposes the deliberate adoption of a pause. This is not merely slowing down, it is actively creating intellectual space. It is recognizing that between seeing an irritating event and formulating your reply lies a sacred window, a moment where the chaotic river of impulse can be intercepted by the steady hand of reason. Think of conflict as a conversation, but one that has been hijacked by adrenaline. The other party speaks, triggering a cascade of emotions in you: defensiveness, anger, indignation. Your initial instinct is to counter that energy with equal and opposite force, to match their volume, their tone, their fury. But this reflexive matching is precisely what keeps the cycle going. It treats emotional intensity as a form of merit, that the louder one screams, the more validated they feel. The art of delayed reaction requires us to treat our emotions not as truth-tellers, but as mere messengers carrying information about external slight or internal imbalance. And like any messenger, they are unreliable and fleeting. They require an examination before they can be trusted enough to dictate action. Consider a simple frustration: being trapped in traffic. The physical gridlock is itself an externality, one entirely outside your sphere of influence. Your immediate thoughts might begin the internal spiral: unfairness, wasted time, how this ruins your schedule. Why does everything always happen when I am late? This chain reaction of annoyance turning into self-recrimination is nothing more than a cascade of exaggerated expectations placed upon inert steel and unmoving geometry. The pause allows us to perform a vital psychological inventory. It forces us out of the dramatic narrative the moment presents and back into the stark reality of our own agency. The question we must ask in that silence is not, what does this person/situation asterisk mean asterisk? But rather, what am I asterisk choosing asterisk to do with my attention right now? By asking this, we dismantle the assumption that an external event holds inherent emotional power over us. We realize that all things: the bad traffic jam, the dismissive comment, the overwhelming email thread, are fundamentally neutral. They are raw data inputs. The genius of delayed reaction is its radical self-containment. It means your internal equilibrium can remain unshaken even when the external environment is screaming chaos. You stop treating life as a play where you must deliver an instant, perfect performance of outrage or disappointment. Instead, you learn to observe the scene from the position of intellectual detachment. This discipline deepens the concept of internal sovereignty. By delaying your response, you are not merely buying time, you are fundamentally redefining who holds the keys to your state of being. You shift the locus of control from the chaotic world outside, the traffic, the speaker's arrogance, the poor timing, and anchor it entirely within the space of your decision. The power is never in the event itself. It always resides solely in the quality of judgment that chooses how to interact with it. And what does this choice of response look like in practice? It means replacing the urgent reflex with considered wisdom. When faced with a sharp critique, instead of immediately entering defensive justification, you pause and ask, is this feedback aimed at improving the work, or is it merely a reflection of the critic's own emotional state? You detach the message from the messenger's perceived malice. When facing prolonged irritation, the endless repetition of an annoying habit in another person, the impulse is to lash out, to correct, to point fingers. The delay compels you instead toward curiosity. You ask, what unknown boundary or misconception is this behavior revealing about me? This turns the antagonist into a self-investigatory prompt. The practice of delayed reaction, therefore, is a profound and liberating act of philosophical refusal. It refuses the emotional tyranny of urgency. It rejects the modern cult of immediate satisfaction. It teaches us that true composure is not an absence of feeling. It is the disciplined capacity to feel profoundly, yet respond minimally. To experience the full wash of annoyance or disappointment while maintaining the steady, cool vigilance of the observer. This delayed response becomes your internal citadel in miniature, a small, perfectly controlled space within a world perpetually designed for emotional overload. It is the constant reminder that while nothing can be forced to be otherwise, you are always free to choose how your consciousness receives what is asterisk. This freedom, this absolute refusal to let external circumstances dictate internal peace, constitutes the highest form of self-mastery.